So chaos you want. How many of you dealt with that chaos when it came to wrestling with the unemployment insurance system? Some of the rhetoric we heard was, well, that chaos was just the pandemic crush overwhelming the system. Well, yes, that's true in a very narrow sense. The system collapsed in so many places, meaning people who were desperate to get a check to pay rent or for food had to wait months and months for a first check. And lots of people just gave up. But here's the truth, folks. That's a feature, not a bug. The unemployment system has been set up to fail for decades. It's a patchwork of 50 different states with different rules and different benefits. And for sure, lots of those rules and benefits are political decisions to give the people as little as possible when corporations fire workers because corporate CEOs only care about their own benefits and keeping shareholders happy so the CEOs keep their jobs. Because when someone loses their job in this puritanical free market monstrosity, it's the worker's fault, not the system's fault. And get this, most state systems are still running on a 1970s software program because politicians don't care if you get your money on time. So as the enhanced unemployment benefits are about to expire at the end of March, but seem likely, hopefully, to be extended in a new stimulus bill, is this chaos going to continue to be as bad as it was a year ago? And how do we fix this broken system? So let's get some insights from Michele Evermore, a senior policy analyst at the National Employment Law Project and a leading national expert on the unemployment insurance system. So last year, Michele, as you well know, when we had this unprecedented, and I think unprecedented is sometimes a word that is overused, but in this case, it was unprecedented in terms of how rapid the economy collapsed because of the pandemic. There was just chaos when it came to the unemployment insurance system writ large. And you quite well know, you're an expert at this, but I'm sort of saying this for my audience. People could not get access sometimes for weeks or months into the system to just try to file their information so they could try to get what for many was a desperately needed check. So the first question I want to ask you is, it's kind of a dual question. Had you ever seen anything so bad in terms of the chaos of the system? And has anything changed since then that makes people feel somewhat optimistic that moving forward, especially as we're looking hopefully at the end of March where the unemployment benefits will be extended, the extended unemployment benefits will be extended. Do you think it'll be any better?
Yes. So last year was completely crazy. So, just to set the table here, at the beginning of 2020, states had less for administrative funding to actually pay out benefits than they had at the beginning of 2001 in absolute dollars. That's not accounting for inflation or population growth. And, unemployment was at a historic low right before it hit a historic high.
And
So
why
when
was it so little? Why was it so low? Is it because they just didn't think to replenish it? Was there something unusual that happened?
So nobody pays attention to unemployment, especially unemployment administration, when there's not a recession.
Mm.
And so, funds had slowly ticked down over the years. And also, unemployment insurance administrative funding is tied to the unemployment rate. And the unemployment rate was at a historic low. And so, the federal government figured unemployment insurance agencies aren't where we should be spending our money versus cancer research, education, all of the other things that are in the same bill that unemployment insurance administration's in. So then, we go to the third week in March, and all of a sudden claims spiked to 3.3 million. And the week after that, 6.6 million. And the week after that, 6.6 million more, and 5.4 after that. Like, we are still seeing people, more than 1 million people file every week. Now, to put that in historic perspective, I mean, this has been months of every single week being over 1 million. Before the pandemic, the highest week on record was 695,000 in October of 1982.
So we're looking at roughly 40% more. I'm doing rough math.
Um,
No, it's
Actually,
more than
so
that.
to go,
It's
yeah, to
two
go
thirds. Yeah, it's
from
two thirds. Yeah.
695,000 to 6.6 million, that's 10 times more, right?
Oh, I
So,
thought on a weekly basis. I was thinking of the weekly basis, but yes, overall, you're right. It's tenfold.
mhm. And so states just were not ready to handle that. Um, so we've seen this. We saw this extraordinary push into the system. Now, taking another step back, in the summer of 2019, I wrote a paper about how state unemployment insurance systems were not ready for a recession. I mean, I didn't realize how right I was going to be, but I knew that that was going to be the case.
It's nice
And
to be right.
not in this case. I've never been sadder to be right about anything. Um, so essentially, a lot of states had actually sabotaged their system. Some states put in a computer system that was designed to deny benefits.
And
And
we're going to come to that in a second. I
yeah,
just want to tie up now the point about at that moment, that was extraordinary. And now we're looking at this moment where we're trying to hopefully see it somewhat better because people are still, as you point out, we're still at a very high rate of unemployment claims. Hopefully, as we're speaking now, we think there's a strong likelihood that the extended unemployment benefits are going to get new life in the upcoming stimulus bill. So, are people going to face the same craziness, or is it going to be somewhat better? And in a minute, we're going to get to the inherent problems with the system, which you and I have talked about offline previously.
mhm. Yes, so there's always craziness. There's going to be craziness until we long term fix these systems. So at the beginning of the pandemic, the problem was there were people flooding the system, and also Congress, like within a couple of weeks of the real onset of COVID, passed new programs for states to also implement. So states were building the plane as they were flying it.
Mm.
Um, the craziness that we're seeing now is a slightly different flavor of craziness, but still crazy. And that's that Congress keeps going right up until the deadline when benefits get shut off to turn them back on again. And so, benefits turned off on December 26th. The president signed an extension December 27th after everything was shut off. So it's taken states up until now to program the fix into their system. Well, these are people who've been living on sub-poverty level benefits for months, and now they've got to wait weeks to get their benefits restarted again. This is absolute trauma to those people.
It
Yeah.
really is a microscopic view on the point you made that we come right up to the deadline, that so many politicians just don't really care about those kinds of people who are at the end of their rope, who are unemployed, as you point out, on a good day, meaning pre-pandemic. It's as if it's just not in on their radar, and they're happy to wait till the last minute because it doesn't affect them directly. They're getting a big paycheck, and it just feels like, oh, okay, we'll take care of that without thinking of the devastating impact on people.
Well, I think there is some of that, and I also think there are elected officials who care deeply about the unemployed, but that it doesn't click with them that necessarily when we pass legislation, the next day they can't program the fix into the computer, because what do they have to do? Change a date? How hard that can that be? They're just I think understandably people who wouldn't imagine that it takes months or weeks to program a small fix into a computer system.
So let's look at the system as a whole. And one of the things that I pointed out since the pandemic began is that the horror of the pandemic, let's just state that up front. Nobody wanted this to happen. The death and destruction that people are facing, and obviously the economic deprivation and the way in which people are losing their savings, they can't afford to pay for food. It's horrendous. But in all that, there's this small silver lining to me, which is that the pandemic exposed the way in which we have this society that just does not take care of people. So I'm thinking of, for example, the lack of paid sick leave, the fact that our health care, we've debated this for a long time, is tied to our employers. And so you lose your job, you lose your health care in this country, unlike, say, in advanced country in Europe, for example, where The government takes care of that. Do you think that this is a moment where we can actually look at the unemployment system and really dig into how flawed it is and what are the flaws? Because as you just pointed out before, in 2019, you wrote this paper that the system was almost doomed and ready to fail.
Yeah, I think that's right. So here's my concern. It's twofold. So number one, I think that the CARES Act papered over a lot of problems within the unemployment insurance system. So we're not seeing what some of the actual problems are. So the first thing is the CARES Act increased eligibility. It set up this new program called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, which applies to workers who could not have gotten regular unemployment insurance. So there you've solved who gets unemployment insurance for a little while. And then it also,
For example, give us a couple of examples. Who was that?
so people who are self-employed, people who are independent contractors, and also
Gig
people
workers, what we call gig workers.
Some states, gig workers are covered under regular unemployment insurance. So I would say gig workers who were misclassified as independent employees. Okay. And then the other thing is people who didn't have monetary eligibility for regular unemployment insurance. So regular unemployment insurance cuts people out if they don't earn enough. And it cuts people out if they, people who, pandemic unemployment insurance applied to people who had COVID, were caring for somebody with COVID, had a kid out of school, were immunocompromised and couldn't go out of their houses. Pandemic unemployment insurance covered this entire universe of people that would have been left out of unemployment insurance. So, that eligibility question was sort of solved for a little while. The other thing is people don't get enough money. There's two bad things about unemployment insurance. Not enough people get it, and it doesn't pay enough. And so this federal pandemic unemployment compensation, which was $600 through the end of July, and then there was an additional $300 through September 5th, that sort of covered up how insufficient unemployment insurance is. So I do worry that we think that we'll just fix unemployment insurance every time there's a crisis. But you can't do that, because what we saw, we fixed some of the main eligibility and recipients, or eligibility and sufficiency questions. But what we didn't fix is the fact that these systems are outdated, and that yeah.
So the first one, let's kind of pull those 2 points you made before. First of all, the current system, too many people are left out, and by chance in the pandemic, people were convinced to include a lot of people. So is the first fix that we have to redefine who's covered long-term, not, as you point out, with each fix, but long-term, the federal government has to say to states, you must cover all these people, period.
Absolutely. So, that category of people that you pointed out, that's on everybody's mind is the gig workers. Gig workers should be covered under regular unemployment insurance. There's this definition of employee that some states have that say, if you don't decide, how your work goes, if it's the thing that your employer is mainly involved in deciding, and you don't direct yourself all day every day, then you're an employee. And so you take an Uber driver, so they don't get to pick who their clients are. They don't get to decide their rates, and for their employer, it's their employer's primary course of business. I would say that app drivers are absolutely a perfect example of a misclassified employee.
Right. So now let's move to the benefits part. And it seems to me that there's two questions about this, at least. One is that, and now I'm going to make a gross generalization, but I think it's true that because the states set their specific benefit level, what they're going to pay out for UI, that there's a great divide in this country. And I think it's probably true that so-called blue states pay higher benefits for unemployment insurance than so-called red states. And there may be some differences in it. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. And so, in a sense, this question about what people should get for unemployment isn't an obvious economic one. It's a political one.
That's totally right. And so there's a vast difference between states when it comes to how much and how many people get unemployment insurance. In Florida, last in 2019, only 11% of unemployed people were able to access a benefit, and the maximum benefit there was $275 a week. And
Wow.
then you go to a New Jersey or a Massachusetts where half of people who are unemployed get a benefit, and it's for $500 or $600 a week. That is a massive, massive difference. And okay, you might be able to make the case that somebody in Massachusetts should get a higher unemployment insurance absolute dollar amount benefit every week because it costs more to live in Massachusetts than it does in Mississippi. But then you look at how much of prior income it replaces, and that varies dramatically. And if you look at if you take a map, you take a heat map, and you show how many people are able to get a benefit, and on another map you show how much of income that replaces. When you look at the states that are worst in that regard and overlap it with demographics, you will find a stark comparison that the states primarily where Black workers tend to live more often also have worse unemployment insurance systems. So, this federal nature of unemployment insurance is also quite racist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's then attacking people, especially people of color, and making it almost inevitable they're going to be sinking deeper into poverty. And this is the next question I want to ask. There should be, and I know you have a number in mind, there should be some federal standard that replaces a certain percentage of people's income when they become unemployed, and do it in a way that isn't punitive. In other words, in this country, there's this sort of puritanical thought that it's your fault that when you're unemployed, as opposed to in other countries where people realize, political leaders and movements, because unions are stronger in other countries, realize that when you lose your job, it's usually, almost the majority of times, it's because some corporation made some decision to close up shop, to cut jobs. It's not your fault. And so people should not suffer for that.
Exactly. And unemployment insurance at its core says that you only get an unemployment insurance benefit if you lost your job involuntarily. And you need to demonstrate that to even get a check. And then when you look at how much income it should replace, a year ago, I would have said 50% of income is about right, because that's what experts have been saying for years. But now that we've seen that unemployment insurance can replace over 100% of income, and people still accept employment because they want that stability, they want the healthcare insurance that comes with a job, they want all of those things that come with a job, I'm starting to think 60 or 70% income replacement still is correct, because people want a long-term stable thing. And if you pair a higher replacement rate with also good job training or reemployment services, or some sort of attachment to the labor force, people will find better replacement jobs, and that'll keep mass layoffs from driving down wages everywhere.
Now, let's spend a minute or two on one of your favorite subjects, because I know that from talking to you, which is the way in which what we talked about before, the politicization of the system. Basically, you find governors, and you mentioned Florida, I think, is one of your favorite examples. It's not just that they keep benefits low. It's not just that they're trying to exclude a whole bunch of people from even getting benefits. They're making it impossible for people to actually apply in an easy way. And the way they've set up these barriers basically frustrates people, and people can't get the benefit because they're being blocked. It's seen as an administrative step, the stuff you have to fill out, but it really is a political way of stiff-arming people who are trying to get benefits.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about this without sounding like some sort of government nerd. Who wants to hear about UI administration, right? But you raised Florida, and I'm pretty sure they're never going to let me go to Disneyland again, or Disney World.
Oh, the burdens that you have to carry on behalf of the people. My goodness.
Yeah, but I've been talking a lot about that state because, when they upgraded, so, people say that this is all these antiquated computer systems, but Florida is actually one of the states that modernized their computer system. And when they did so, they added a 45 question skills assessment to the application. So you couldn't even get through to get unemployment insurance without answering these 45 questions about what what skills you have. And states have added like crazy administrative burden. So even states that didn't pass a law where your elected official said, yes, let's cut unemployment insurance benefits, they were still able to get at it in a sneaky, sort of underhanded, put loopholes or put hurdles into the computer system, both in terms of how you apply, and then once you apply, the things that stop you from getting benefits on the back end. The way that you've answered certain questions can cut you off, or if the spelling of your name is different than the way that your employer spells it, those kinds of things can really hurt you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for our wrap-up question, and this is something you and I have discussed, and I don't want to get too technical in this answer, but there is a way, if you look at the macro view of this, that the federal government, and I'm wondering actually if you think the Biden administration is thinking about this and needs pressure from the grassroots, from unions, and from other folks, there is a way that the federal government could set higher standards and essentially require states to lift benefits, make sure that the system is not as cumbersome, and include all the people that we just talked about, right? The federal government has that power.
Right. And so I have no idea what the Biden administration is thinking about this, but what I can tell you is that, I've been working with Congress for a while now. And when they invited me to testify, I said, like, look, there are these things that you can set as a floor to make sure that states get benefits. And with that need to come, some sort of penalty so that states that don't abide by certain rules or don't meet certain metrics, then there's actually, some sort of penalty for that. So, states should provide 26 weeks. They should provide, a certain level of income replacement, whether that's 50, 60, 70%. They should, the federal government should establish what is a good cause to quit. When can you refuse an unsafe job? Things like that. That could all be done federally through the legislative process. And
there could be some oversight, I assume, of how the systems are working. Both, are they newly computerized and updated from the 1970s system that many of them still work on? But more to the point, using the Florida example, the federal government could exercise some oversight and say, wait a minute, you've set up a system that's designed to screw people from getting their benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can put anything in those minimum standards that you want to put in those minimum standards. And, I absolutely think that, I think that a lot of people are saying there just needs to be a federal floor. Just where that federal floor ends up being, is going to be largely dependent on, negotiations in Congress. And yeah, I mean, I think a federal floor is very likely. People are tired of the way that the system has worked. And even in the compromise that I saw come out today, there was funding for fixing computer systems. So I think, you can't blame everything on the computer. The computer was programmed by somebody to do something, but people are recognizing that these systems aren't reaching the people that they need to reach.
Well, certainly they don't have to put a 45 question whole system there to essentially frustrate people and block people from basically accessing their benefits. Michele, thanks very much for your expertise. We really appreciate it. And we're going to have you back on the show when there's some development in this whole system, hopefully in a positive way. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.